Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent Makori in for hashtag the UWAT. It's Thursday, September the 23rd. This is Africa 54.
Hundreds of people stormed the Namibian parliament to protest a genocide compensation deal. Nigerians offer artworks to the British Museum in a new take on looted bronzes from Benin. And U.S. lawmakers criticize the treatment of Haitians attempting to cross the U.S.-Mexico border.
Hundreds of protesters climbed over a fence to storm Namibia's parliament building, angry over Germany's genocide compensation offer, an offer they say is too small. David Doyle has more.
Around 300 protesters stormed Namibia's parliament on Tuesday. Inside, lawmakers had been due to vote on a $1 billion compensation offer from Germany. That's to atone for its genocide against tribespeople in its former colony more than a century ago. But demonstrators from the affected communities say it's not enough. They climbed over fences to enter the parliament building, led by traditional leaders and opposition figures like McHenry Venani.
For the last 31 years, the SWAPO government has received more than $1.1 billion from the German government. The Germans listen very carefully. The Germans say they are guilty of murdering us, but for this guilt, they are paying the same amount that they've paid governments for the last 31 years.
German colonial soldiers massacred thousands of Herero and Nama people between 1904 and 1908. That's after they rebelled against German rule. Survivors were driven into the desert. Many ended up in concentration camps to be used as slave labor. Some died from the cold, malnutrition, and exhaustion. On May 28th, Germany announced an agreement to fund projects in a southwest African nation worth more than €1 billion over 30 years. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas apologized and officially described the slaughter as a genocide for the first time.
I'm extremely happy and very grateful to have reached an agreement with Namibia on how to deal with one of the darkest chapters in our shared history.
A pro-government faction of the Herero and Nama has provisionally accepted Germany's offer, one of its leaders said, and the parliamentary vote is likely to pass.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. Sudanese authorities have seized lucrative assets that for years provided backing for Hamas, shedding light on how the country served as a haven for the Palestinian militant group under former leader Omar al-Bashir. The takeover of at least a dozen companies that officials say were linked to the Hamas has helped accelerate Sudan's realignment with the West since Bashir's overthrow in 2019. According to officials from a task force set up to dismantle the Bashir regime, the companies include real estate, a hotel in a prime Khartoum location, an exchange bureau, a television station, and more than 1 million acres of farmland. Tunisian President Kais Saied has declared that he will rule by decree and ignore parts of the constitution as he prepares to change the political system, prompting immediate opposition from rivals. Saied has held near total power since July 25th when he fired the prime minister, suspended parliament, and assumed executive authority, citing a national emergency in a move his foes are calling a coup. His intervention has undermined the democratic gains of Tunisia's 2011 revolution that ended autocratic rule and triggered the Arab Spring. The elected parliament will not only remain suspended, but its members will stop being paid and they will still be stripped of immunity from prosecution. The UN The UN General Assembly is ongoing, with world leaders addressing a range of issues, including the coronavirus global pandemic, climate change, and human rights. For more insight, let's go live to the United Nations in New York, where VOA UN correspondent Migrant Bashir is following the discussions. Hello, Margaret. Now, let's start with the food summit taking place right there. It turns out food is so critical not only to our health, but also to development.
Exactly, Vincent. And I just want to share this really shocking statistic with you. 3 billion people on the planet cannot afford a healthy diet. So when you think about that, that's nearly half the world's population. And nearly a third of all food that is produced is either lost or wasted. So there's food there, and there's food enough for everyone, but we're all not sharing in it equally. So the UN had this food system summit. It's been headed up by the former Rwandan agriculture minister, Agnes Kalibadi. She's the special envoy who worked on this. It's been in the works for more than a year. And the goal is to look at the aspects of food production in order to improve food systems. So when they say food systems, they mean everything from putting the seeds in the ground to harvesting it, putting it on a truck, and shipping it to your market. And it's also about quality and nutrition and accessibility of good food for everyone, not just any food. And in fact, apparently it takes double the energy and inputs to create some junk food, really, some of the bad food that we eat. So this is what it's about, and it's also about this decade of action right now that we're in order to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And the second goal, as you may know, is zero hunger. And the UN is saying that food systems and improving them isn't just tied to eradicating hunger. It can be interlinked with all the other Sustainable Development Goals. So you can see it in climate change. You can use it in ending poverty. It's very important. If people are fed, if kids are fed at school, they'll get a better education. So we'll reach the SDG on education. So they're really sort of interconnecting it with everything. So this summit was really about reimagining how we produce safe, affordable, and healthy food for everyone. And it's the beginning of a long conversation. Yeah,
and indeed good food equals good health, right? Now,
exactly.
Margaret, sure. Now, the world leaders are still talking, giving speeches there at the UN General Assembly. Can you give us some highlights of some of the, especially African leaders who have spoken there?
Yeah, a big day for Africa. I think I counted about 16 African leaders today will take the podium. We heard from South Africa this morning, President Ramaphosa. He kind of picked a theme that we heard from many of the African leaders. He's focused on vaccine equitable distribution and access, and climate change. Those have been really the running themes throughout the week, but we really heard about them from African nations because they're on the kind of short end of the stick in terms of both vaccinations and mitigating climate change. So we heard about that from him. Angola's president mentioned the coups in Mali and in Guinea, and he said that power can't be taken away. It really needs to be returned to the proper authorities in these countries, and he called specifically for the release of President Alpha Conde of Guinea. And the president of Burkina Faso spoke about the Sahel, which of course is a big issue with terrorism and instability and security in his region, and he called for more action from the UN Security Council on the G5 force. He wants it to be under a Chapter 7 UN mandate, which would give it more strength, more power, and to have regular financing from the UN budget. And interestingly, I'd like to bring up from the Sahel that there was a meeting between, a telephone meeting between President Macron and President Biden yesterday. And in the readout of that meeting, there was a line about the Sahel that the U.S. committed to reinforcing its support to counterterrorism operations in the Sahel. And the Secretary of State of the United States met this morning with the French foreign minister, and again there was another mention of the Sahel. So I think we should watch this space and see in the next few weeks if there might be some new commitments coming from the U.S. to assist with the G5 force there.
Well, we're looking forward to more reporting from you, Margaret. Thank you very much. That's VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir reporting live from the United Nations in New York. Now, Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema says in his first speech at the United Nations General Assembly that he owed his victory to Zambia's young people who overwhelmingly voted for his political party, UPND, and pledged to reduce the fiscal deficit.
I am pleased to inform this august House that the people of Zambia, the Republic of the People of Zambia, once again rose to the occasion to usher in a new government through a peaceful election. This has enabled Zambia to further consolidate our democratic credentials, which serves as an inspiration to the African continent, where the outcome of our election was determined by those who vote and not those who count votes. Very important. We are therefore proud to provide leadership in our country where people aspire for a free and just society and where they aspire for their voices to be heard. Mr. President, we were able to achieve this political transformation even at a time when Zambia was grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic and in the midst of deep sorrow following the passing on of our founding father and first Republican president, Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda. I therefore wish to take this opportunity on behalf of the people of Zambia to pay tribute to this icon leader who was fondly known in our country and elsewhere as KK.
Meanwhile, Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo says Ghana is one of the few countries that registered positive economic growth despite the coronavirus pandemic. He appealed to the United Nations Assembly to help developing countries build their economies instead of relying on handouts from developed countries.
Between 2017 to 2020, Ghana recorded an average growth rate of 7%, amongst the highest in the world. In 2020, when the global economy in sub-Saharan Africa has contracted by 3.5% and 2.1% respectively, Ghana was one of the few countries that produced a positive growth rate. This is a testament to our determination to build a Ghana beyond aid. 1 year on, although infection rates and deaths are relatively lower in the region, the virus's impact on economies and livelihoods has been damaging. The latest numbers from the African Development Bank indicate that African economies, which contracted by 2.1% in 2020, are yet to return to pre-pandemic levels.
Well, now to East Africa, where Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta highlighted the need for equitable global access to COVID-19 vaccines as a measure to build back better from the pandemic.
Is that we must put equitable global vaccine access at the core of building back better from this COVID-19 pandemic. And the second is that we need to provide tangible climate financial support to developing countries and ensure that a significant portion of green manufacturing is located in developing countries. Third, we must align our conflict resolution tools to the strategic shift in threats to regional and international peace and security. Fourth, we must strengthen the competence of states to manage diversity and regional trust between citizens and institutions and between citizens and their leaders.
Be sure to watch Africa 54 on Friday for more headlines from African leaders speaking at the United Nations. Now, down south, South African Airways staff broke into a song and a dance at the country's biggest airport on Thursday at the site of the national airline taking to the skies for the first time in a year. Staffers were seen singing church songs, clapping and dancing as a South African Airways plane with its tail fin bearing the colors of the South African flag took off. State-owned SAA halted all operations last September when it ran out of funds, but it exited administration in April thanks to another massive government bailout. It restarted domestic flights from Johannesburg to Cape Town Thursday, and next week will relaunch a slimmed-down international service to 5 African capitals: Accra, Kinshasa, Harare, Lusaka, and Maputo.
It's the first time for us after so many months. We've been waiting for this moment. I am so excited. I'm over the moon. I am over the moon. I'm actually emotional. The fact that it's happening today, we never thought it would happen.
Well, the government says it will sell a majority stake in the airline to a local consortium, and a due diligence process is being completed, but the share purchase agreement is not yet signed. A new guild of bronze casters in Nigeria's Benin city have created pieces of art to give to the British Museum in hope of encouraging the return of the looted Benin bronzes. Angela Hokumadu has the details.
In Nigeria's Benin, new bronzes are on show. The city was once the center of the mighty Kingdom of Benin, whose world-famous Benin bronzes were looted by British troops in 1897. But the new artworks are not a replacement. Artist Osarabo Zaitna Okoro says they are a gift to those who are still holding on to the stolen treasures.
We're actually offering this plaque to the British Museum as a way of re-establishing, changing the narrative between museums and a lot of the cultures that have been hurt and by the stolen artifacts. Is a way of being able to show that we can actually give you new artifacts. We can give you artifacts, an artifact that doesn't have the taints and the word of loot and theft associated with it.
The pieces being offered include the 2-meter by 2-meter plaque, which depicts historical events in Benin, and a life-size ram made entirely from spark plugs. They have been created by the Ahiamuem Guild. The original Benin bronzes, dating from at least the 16th century, are among Africa's finest and most culturally significant artifacts. European museums that house them have faced years of criticism because of their status as symbols of colonial greed. Germany recently said it plans to start returning bronzes to Nigeria next year. But the British Museum, which houses the largest and most significant collection, has resisted calls for a full return. It says on its website that Director Hartwig Fischer had an audience with the Oba, or King, of Benin in 2018. That included a, quote, discussion of new opportunities for sharing and displaying objects. But many in Benin City, like bronze caster Owa Ata, wants to see a full return.
This same work now, it was originated from this place. So when they bring it back now, that pride, it has come to us again. So we'll be very, very happy. So it will even boost our work up.
Zaitna Okoro says a concept has been created of ancient Benin to portray it as a dead civilization.
So they wanted to dissociate it from the fact that there's a living civilization, that the people are still alive.
He acknowledges that European museums have allowed the bronzes to reach a global audience, but he says it's now time for them to come home. Zaitna Okoro recently traveled to London, in part to advance his cause.
The descendants of the people who casted those bronzes, they don't actually get, they've never seen that work, because most of them can't fly and afford to fly into London to come to the British Museum, and they have these catalogues, which are these books, like PDF copies of the catalogue from the British Museum, which they use to, to reference the work of their ancestors. And I think it's so sad.
He says he has a meeting coming up with curators from the museum's Africa department. Asked to comment on how it would respond to the offer of the new artworks, the British Museum said it was a matter for discussion between itself and the parties making the offer.
Angela Kumadu of Reuters fired that report. Afghanistan's Taliban leaders have asked to have their representatives speak at the United Nations General Assembly this week, as other world leaders call on the Taliban to grant equal rights and opportunities to girls and women. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
Now back in charge in Afghanistan, Taliban leaders are trying to present a sense of normalcy. Here, heavily armed Taliban fighters and their families walked around the zoo in Kabul on a recent outing. Taliban leaders have asked to address the UN General Assembly this week and named spokesman Suhail Shaheen as their representative. The UN said a committee will rule on the request, but that is not likely to happen during the current session. In a recent interview with VOA, Shaheen said the Taliban and the U.S. were adversaries during the war, as he put it, when our country was occupied, but said things could be different now.
Now we are in a new chapter. We want to turn over a new page. In that page, it depends on the U.S., whether they are coming for work to help in the construction of Afghanistan, in eradication of poverty in the country, and help us in other sectors like education sectors, infrastructure, and also if they want to come and invest in the country, so they are welcome.
Afghanistan's current ambassador to the UN, Ghulam Isakai, was appointed in July by the former government of President Ashraf Ghani and continues to speak out on social media against the Taliban. U.S. President Joe Biden spoke of a new chapter in Afghanistan in Tuesday's address to the UN General Assembly.
We've ended 20 years of conflict in Afghanistan. And as we close this period of relentless war, we're opening a new era of relentless diplomacy, of using the power of our development aid to invest in new ways of lifting people up around the world, of renewing and defending democracy.
The Emir of Qatar warned against isolating the Taliban.
We stress the importance of the international community continuing to provide support to Afghanistan at this critical stage and to separate humanitarian aid from political differences. We also stress the importance of continuing dialogue with the Taliban, because boycotting only leads to polarization and reactions. As for dialogue, it can bring positive results.
In a UN forum on Afghan women, the executive director of UNICEF had a message for Taliban leaders.
It is critically important that girls and boys in Afghanistan have an equal chance to learn and to develop the skills they need to thrive. We are deeply worried that many girls may not be allowed back into school.
The Taliban have said a religious scholar will decide on how girls will be able to attend school under Islamic law, known as Sharia, as soon as possible. The Taliban ordered boys back to school this week, but made no mention of allowing girls or women teachers to return to class. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
U.S. Republican and Democratic lawmakers are criticizing the treatment of thousands of Haitian migrants attempting to cross the U.S.-Mexico border as the U.S. increased deportation flights out of the state of Texas. The bipartisan criticism came as top Biden administration officials condemned images showing U.S. Border Patrol agents on horseback chasing migrants seeking asylum. VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson has more.
The crossing between the U.S. and Mexico in Del Rio, Texas, locked down Wednesday as thousands of Haitian migrants set up camp under the bridge between the two countries, waiting to cross and claim asylum. After startling images of Border Patrol agents on horseback detaining migrants earlier this week, a top U.S. Homeland Security official promised a swift investigation.
The images that emanated from Del Rio, Texas, over the last several days, and correctly and necessarily were met with our nation's horror, because they do not reflect who we are as a country, nor do they reflect who the United States Customs and Border Protection is.
The White House echoed those concerns while noting U.S. immigration policy still has to be followed at the border.
This has been an incredibly heart-wrenching issue. We've watched the photos of Haitians gathering under a bridge, many with families, and the horrific video of the CBP officers on horses using brutal and inappropriate measures against innocent people. I think it's important to address that and separately address what our immigration policies are and understand that people are combining them.
But congressional Republicans said the Biden administration's immigration policies directly caused this crisis.
This nightmare is the direct result of the left-wing policies and left-wing messages pushed by the Biden administration. They say their approach to immigration is the compassionate path, the one that reflects the soul of America. They are wrong.
The Border Patrol response also drew harsh criticism from Democrats who probed the reasons Haitians in particular are being deported and called for an end to summary deportations initiated by the Trump administration based on the COVID-19 pandemic.
How much did race play a part in these actions? Are you looking into that as well? And also, have you considered this Trump relic of Title 42, not eliminating, but a suspension of it, in light of the fact that Haitians have been determined to be no national security threat?
With respect to Title 42 and its exercise, that is an authority of the Centers for Disease Control. It is not a matter of immigration policy. It is a matter of public health policy driven by the situation of COVID-19 and where the trajectory of that pandemic is.
Thousands of Haitian migrants are being released into the U.S. if they promise to appear at an immigration office within 60 days, while others are being deported on flights back to Haiti. The criteria for who stays and goes is not immediately clear. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch out for